I was sitting in a busy coffee shop yesterday watching a man at the table next to me. He was dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, but his posture was completely collapsed, staring into his latte as if it held the answers to a terminal diagnosis. He was venting to a friend, methodically listing every reason why he was miserable in his career: the demanding boss, the crushing mortgage, the golden handcuffs of his salary. He kept repeating the same phrase like a mantra: I have no choice, I just have to do this. It's just the way things are. To an outsider, he looked like a victim of circumstance, a man crushed by the weight of inevitable obligations. But then the conversation took a fascinating, almost jarring turn. His friend simply asked, so why don't you just quit and do something else? You would expect a sigh of longing, maybe a, wouldn't that be nice? Instead, the man in the suit immediately stiffened. He didn't look relieved by the possibility of escape. He looked terrified. He instantly switched from complaining to aggressively defending his own cage. He started listing excuses with a sudden, frantic energy, claiming his personality wasn't built for risk, that society demanded this of him, that he was structurally incapable of change. That instantaneous shift from lamenting his lack of freedom to fiercely fighting to prove he had none revealed something unsettling. He wasn't actually trapped by his job or his mortgage. He was performing a very specific, sophisticated act of pretending to be a thing. He was desperate to convince himself that he was as solid and unchangeable as the chair he was sitting on, because the alternative, admitting that he could physically stand up, walk out the door, and never come back, was a vertigo so intense he couldn't face it. He was the living, breathing embodiment of a terrified flight from freedom that a certain French philosopher put on trial exactly 80 years ago.
And that, right there, is the perfect opening for understanding Jean-Paul Sartre. What you witnessed was mauvaise foi, or bad faith, in action.
Right?
This deep dive is all about exploring how that exact concept, the act of pretending to be a fixed object, a chair, a role, a predetermined essence, perfectly captures the flavor of modern anxieties.
From the corporate world right through to how we build our identities online.
Exactly. The central thesis we're working with is pretty radical, and you really nailed it in that anecdote. Bad faith is the sophisticated denial of our terrifying absolute freedom.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that core idea feels so counterintuitive to how we normally think about who we are. I mean, we grow up thinking we have a destiny or a true self to find. Sartre just comes in and flips centuries of philosophy on its head. He says the standard idea is essence precedes existence, like a paper cutter, right? The blueprint, the essence, comes before the actual object.
Precisely. But for humans, he says, we don't come with a blueprint. That is the starting point of existentialism, the burden of absolute freedom.
So his big claim is existence precedes essence.
That's the revolutionary claim. If you look at a natural object, say a seed, its essence, its predetermined purpose to grow into a specific plant, is all set before it even starts existing.
Right.
We are not seeds. We are conscious beings who just encounter ourselves. We surge up in the world, and we only define ourselves afterwards, through the total sum of our choices and our actions.
So we aren't born a good person or a bad person or even a career person. We literally create those labels for ourselves every single day through what we choose to do. We're a blank slate that's constantly being written on.
Not just a blank slate, but a radically active one. You're not born inherently honest. You become honest through the continuous conscious decision to choose honesty in specific situations.
And that freedom is absolute.
It is, and that's the source of this profound anxiety and responsibility. Because think about it, you're responsible not only for the choices you make, but for choosing the values that you act on. There's no ultimate meaning, no moral guidelines, no God to fall back on.
So every time I choose to be kind, I'm not just being kind in that moment. I'm effectively saying, this is how humanity ought to be. That is a heavy, heavy weight to put on a single choice.
It is.
It's no wonder the man in the suit was running from that.
He was. We are, as Sartre put it, condemned to be free. And since we exist in this state of constant choice, we're always defining ourselves, which means we're never finished, never fixed. And to really get why we flee this state into the comfortable cage of bad faith, we have to look at Sartre's core ontology, his description of how existence itself is structured. He sets up these two fundamental contrasting modes of being. We can use a simple metaphor.
Yeah.
The rock and the fire.
I like that. The framing helps. It makes these abstract concepts feel a bit more grounded. So let's get into the proper terms, but keep the rock and fire in mind.
Okay. So the rock is the En-soi, or being in itself. This is the fixed, passive, dense, solid existence of objects. A rock, a table, a lamp, anything without consciousness.
It just is.
It just is. Its existence is its essence. It's full, dense, static. It can't question itself or change its identity. And crucially, the En-soi represents facticity.
Facticity. So all the unchosen facts about me. My birth, my body, my history.
The past choices you've made that are now just immutable facts. It's the stuff you're thrown into.
Okay, so my height, my family background, the fact that I bought that terrible stock portfolio 5 years ago, those are all fixed parts of my facticity, my rock.
Precisely. They're the conditions you find yourself in. Now, the fire is the pour-soi, or being for itself. This is human consciousness. It's not a fixed object, but a dynamic, active, burning process.
Always becoming something else.
Always. Its defining feature is its ability to negate the present. It's always defined by a kind of nothingness or a lack of being because we are constantly projecting toward a future we are not yet. We are defined by our transcendence, that capacity to continually leap beyond our present facts toward some new potential.
So the rock is just being fixed and complete. The fire is always becoming. It's incomplete, defined by what it lacks and what it chooses to become next. And we, as humans, are stuck between the two.
That is the existential dilemma right there. We're ambiguous. We're caught between the inertia of our facts, the rock, and the boundless potential of our consciousness, the fire.
And bad faith mauvaise is when that conscious fire tries to convince itself that it's a fixed rock.
That is the core maneuver. It's the ultimate act of self-deception. When the free, conscious pour-soi tries to convince itself it's an En-soi, it denies its radical freedom by clinging to some static essence or role just for comfort.
And it's so important to get this right. It's not just, being a hypocrite, lying to other people.
No, this is a deep lie to the self. The self is both the deceiver and the deceived. You're actively choosing to reduce your dynamic, subjective self into a static, objective thing.
This brings us to the classic, maybe even stereotypical example of bad faith. But even after 80 years, it's still so perfectly relevant. The cafe waiter.
It's famous for a reason. Sartre details this waiter whose movements are a little too precise, a little too rapid, who interacts with customers a little too eagerly. He's playing at being a waiter.
Yeah, you could picture it. The way he holds the tray, that slight, almost mechanical tilt of his head when he takes an order. These movements aren't just about being efficient. They're a performance.
Totally. He is trying to prove to himself and everyone else that he is only this role. He's not a conscious being who just happens to be waiting tables today but could, be a poet or a revolutionary tomorrow. He's trying to become the distilled, fixed essence of the waiter.
He's attempting to collapse his boundless potential into this one predefined social box.
Exactly. And the problem isn't the job itself. Having a job as a waiter is fine. The problem is reducing your entire being down to that role, denying the freedom to be otherwise, living like a fixed object.
It's the same logic the man in the suit used. I am a high-paid finance executive. My personality is not built for risk. He's claiming his job title defines his ontological limits. He's pretending to be a rock.
Wow. I'm going to spend the rest of the week judging every service worker I see now. Is their wipe a little too fast? Are they living in bad faith?
It's inescapable once you see it. And if we look at why we do this, why we actively choose to deceive ourselves, it's all about denying that terrible weight of responsibility.
Sartre argues that our willed ignorance, it's all aimed at limiting or just denying the consequences that come with knowledge.
I find this point absolutely fascinating because it's not about being incapable of knowing something. It's about actively choosing to be selectively ignorant.
Yes. We ignore certain facts because we know the consequences and we just don't want the burden of responsibility that comes with them.
So our consciousness has these two modes, the reflective and the pre-reflective.
And we cunningly choose which one to live in based on whether we want to take credit for something or dodge the blame.
Give us a strong modern example of that split in action.
Okay. Consider a person who buys an ethically sourced, locally produced coffee every morning. In that moment, they are in the reflective mode. They're reflecting on themselves, they're noting their virtuous choice, and they're patting themselves on the back for reducing their carbon footprint, supporting local business.
They're affirming their identity as an ethical consumer, a good person.
A good pour-soi. But then they drive 30 miles home in a gas-guzzling truck, blasting the AC.
And in that moment, they switch to the pre-reflective mode.
Completely. The object of their consciousness becomes something external, the traffic, the heat, the podcast they're listening to, and they don't burden themselves with the responsibility for their massive carbon emissions.
They cunningly choose the incomplete picture to maintain a state of bad faith.
Where they can claim the moral high ground when it's easy and just deflect responsibility when it's hard. They're actively choosing not to know, because knowing requires action and anxiety.
So this is more than just hypocrisy. It's an active refusal to face the full weight of your impact. If you know the devastating consequences of, say, systemic inequality, you are responsible for that knowledge. If you choose to ignore it or call it someone else's problem, that's a denial aimed directly at limiting your own responsibility.
Precisely. Ignorance is an ontological choice. It's designed to limit our perceived responsibility in the world. And the fewer responsibilities we accept, the less we feel we need to know.
And this mechanism, this denial of responsibility, it just scales up dramatically when you apply it to large organizations. Which brings us to bad faith in the system itself.
That structural temptation to practice bad faith is enormous in modern bureaucracy. It's where individual choice meets the crushing weight of institutional protocol. We're not just talking about a lonely waiter anymore.
No, we're talking about how adopting these fixed social roles contributes to the erosion of meritocracy, the decline of personal responsibility in our societies.
The modern world specializes in providing these institutional cages that are dressed up as fixed roles. When we step into a large company, we're often asked to leave our pour-soi at the door and just become a professional En-soi, a cog, a functionary.
Let's talk about the anecdote of Julien, the HR manager. This story has been going around Paris corporate circles, and it just perfectly illustrates how this self-deception works in modern bureaucracy. Julien is a mid-level HR manager at a prestigious firm. He has completely dissolved his free personality into his job title. One afternoon, a young, brilliant applicant comes in. She doesn't have the standard required degree, but her portfolio is revolutionary.
She solved problems that Julian's company has been bleeding money over for years.
Every instinct, every measure of merit dictates she should be hired on the spot.
But Julian looks at the checklist. The role of HR manager requires adherence to Protocol A and Compliance Standard B. He rejects her.
And when she asks why, pleading that she can do the work, Julien doesn't admit his anxiety about bending the rules. He doesn't say, I'm frightened to take a risk and face my boss if this goes wrong.
No, instead he adopts what Sartre would call the spirit of seriousness. He says, I have no choice. The system requires this. My hands are tied.
In that instant, he commits the fundamental act of bad faith.
He denies his human freedom to make a judgment call. He attempts to declare himself an object, a machine driven by external rules, the En-soi. He's sacrificing the merit of the company and the potential of this applicant for the safety of his fixed role.
The spirit of seriousness says that values and rules exist outside of human creation, that they're not our choice.
And the terrifying implication is that when competence is systematically replaced by compliance, when individuals hide behind policy to avoid the anxiety of making a choice, that's how societal decay starts.
Common sense and judgment just die when everyone is just following orders.
Julian's bad faith scales up into structural absurdity. It creates a culture of learned helplessness, but it's a chosen helplessness. And this individual bad faith, this flight from choice, doesn't happen in a vacuum. It contributes to a collective form of inauthenticity Sartre called seriality.
Okay, wait. Is seriality just a fancy word for saying we're all strangers on a crowded train? Or is there a specific philosophical weight to that word?
Oh, there is a deep philosophical weight. Seriality is the collective version of bad faith. It's the social condition defined by separation, passive activity, and a shared feeling of powerlessness.
So like a loose group of individuals who are only united by a shared object of interest, like voters in an election or people reading the same news story.
Exactly. Or commuters in a bus queue. They share an object, but there's no interdependent cooperation. They are separated by indifference.
Each person in the series is basically interchangeable.
Completely. They're united, but not collaborative. No one is helping anyone else outside their own private bubble. And an attitude of indifference rules until, a crisis hits, like a gas shortage. And then that indifference turns into hostility.
So in a serial arrangement, you're susceptible to just going with the flow. You buy whatever item is trending, not because you freely chose to value it, but just because it's at the top of the charts. Your freedom is outsourced to the group norm.
And when you scale up these serialized, indifferent actions, you get these profound, unintended consequences that really define the collective failure of our species. This is where the philosophy collides violently with material reality.
Okay, so we have to understand this transition from the philosophical to the material. An action, or praxis, is a free, intentional human activity.
Right, and it alters inorganic matter. But when that intentionality gets fixed, frozen, or sustained by the inertia of other people's actions and the resistance of the material world, it becomes the practical-inert.
I think we need a concrete example for the practical-inert because that sounds extremely dense.
Okay, think of a massive corporate headquarters building, built years ago. It was the product of conscious praxis architects' designs, investors' choices, workers' efforts. Once it's built, that building becomes practico-inert.
It's fixed, dense matter, heavy with the intention of all those past actions.
And now, every person who works there, Julian, the HR manager included, is constrained by that inert matter. They have to commute there, work in a specific room, file paperwork in specific filing cabinets that now weigh a literal ton. The sheer weight and fixedness of the practico-inert structure, which was the result of past freedom, now dictates and limits the future freedom of everyone caught inside it.
Wow, so the bureaucracy isn't just in the rules. It's physically baked into the architecture, the sheer permanence of the system's past choices. And this material reality, this inert mass, is what often delivers the hidden meaning of counterfinality.
Counterfinality is where the outcome of our collective actions becomes devastating, and the complete opposite of what anyone intended. It's the material world pushing back against human intention in a destructive way. Sartre called it anti-praxis.
We often use the simple example of crop rotation, where if serialized peasants don't coordinate, they deplete the soil, making future growth impossible. That's a small, localized counterfinality.
But Sartre gave a far more devastating historical example that feels very analogous to our global crises, the deforestation of China over thousands of years.
Right.
Serialized peasants, each acting individually just to clear land for survival, were engaged in localized, rational praxis. But collectively, the result was the permanent alteration of the geological and hydrographic structure of China.
And when the rainy seasons came, the stripped topsoil washed away, resulting in these devastating, uncontrollable floods.
The devastating rebound was the opposite of what any single peasant intended. They wanted survival, but their combined efforts created an infernal, destructive machine that doomed generations to follow.
And this horrifying mechanism, this unintentional collective catastrophe, is precisely what defines the Anthropocene, the new geological epoch defined by humanity's impact on Earth.
It meets all three conditions for counterfinality. First, the material disposition is there. The Earth's atmosphere is susceptible to the greenhouse effect.
Second, the action becomes a fatality. The massive, serialized, systematic release of carbon dioxide guarantees warming. No single person chose climate change, but the system of industrial production guarantees it as a fixed fate.
And third, the activity has to be carried on everywhere, universally. And it is. Producers and consumers worldwide are engaged in countless serialized praxis.
All these individual desires, often undertaken in bad faith by minimizing personal responsibility, add up to an outcome nobody wanted.
This is the structure of the world's largest collective action problem, a slow-motion train wreck. A death by 7 billion cuts.
It's the ultimate manifestation of the Pour-soi pretending to be an En-soi. We treat the world like a fixed object, a resource to be consumed, instead of a dynamic system that reflects and resists our choices.
And even our seemingly positive actions often just remain within the bounds of seriality. Environmentally conscious things like driving electric cars or recycling are often just exercises in powerlessness if they don't translate into genuine collective action or systemic political change.
So, if the outcome of collective action is inevitably destined to return to seriality or just get bogged down in institutions, does Sartre leave us with any hope? Should we just resign ourselves to the Anthropocene as an inevitable fate?
That is the ultimate existential question, and the answer is a resounding no. Sartre addresses this directly. The obligation to resist the devastation. It has to rest on rejecting complicity, not on anticipating success. Silence and inaction imply complicity with the status quo and its devastating outcomes.
So the famous existentialist call to action fighting fascism because it is fascist, not because you know you're going to win, that applies here too. We have to act simply because injustice or collective self-destruction demands being fought.
Exactly. We break our complicity by choosing action. Even if the problem seems overwhelming, it's the choice itself, the negation of passive seriality, that reaffirms our freedom. We have to try to convert a series into a group infusion, a conscious collective unity. Even though Sartre himself was deeply skeptical that such a unity could ever last.
The struggle itself is the ethical act.
Yes.
Now let's turn our attention from the collective failures of the external world to the internal failures of our identity when we're exposed to the modern other. Sartre famously said, "Hell is other people." He meant that the other's look, that gaze, it objectifies our body into an en-soi and brings about this paralyzing shame of bad faith.
And in the modern world, that gaze isn't limited to the person sitting across from you. It's amplified, digitized, and made continuous by the algorithmic, faceless aggregate of social media, the digital panopticon.
We're constantly under a surveillance that we often willingly submit to, which fosters a new kind of self-deception designed to survive that continuous judgment. We're constantly curating and performing an identity for a digital audience.
It's an insidious form of self-objectification. Consider the common modern scenario. Let's call her Maya, a rising cultural commentator who lives her life online. In Sartre's play No Exit, the characters realize hell is other people because they're trapped under the eternal, judging gaze of others.
They can't escape into sleep or darkness.
Maya is in a modern version of that room. She wakes up and checks her analytics. The other is no longer just a person. It's a faceless digital aggregate, the algorithm and her followers.
She wants to write a post about a nuanced political issue where she sees valid points on both sides.
But as she types, she feels the gaze. She anticipates the backlash from her specific tribe. She imagines the judgment, the ratio, the negative engagement.
And to avoid that hell of alienation, the shame and anxiety of being misunderstood or disliked, she deletes her nuanced, truthful thought.
And replaces it with a performative, extreme slogan she knows will get engagement. She's actively objectifying herself. She's becoming an avatar for her followers to consume, rather than a free subject defined by her own complex thoughts.
She's no longer a person who thinks deeply. She's a content creator, playing a fixed role to satisfy the gaze of the digital other. She's choosing to become an en-soi slogan, an image, a consumable thing, because the freedom to express nuance comes with the anxiety of rejection.
Maya's situation just highlights how the fear of the other's judgment has become stronger than a commitment to one's own truth. And this performative identity, driven by the digital gaze, reinforces bad faith and ultimately dissolves organic social bonds and, frankly, common sense.
True freedom requires the courage to be disliked.
A choice many actively flee from by becoming palatable, fixed objects.
And this self-objectification takes on a literal visual form in the burgeoning metaverse, like on platforms like Meta's Horizon Worlds. This virtual reality space presents a whole new philosophical danger, a new illustration of mauvaise foi.
The ability to craft an idealized avatar is the ultimate mechanism for denying facticity. Users deny the unchosen, often uncomfortable facts of our real body's age, skin, gravity, physical limits by selecting these hyper-idealized digital selves.
And the numbers are wild. A recent internal report estimated that around 72% of users select avatars with bodies that are 20% more fit than averages.
That is the conscious fire, the pour-soi, desperately trying to masquerade as the perfect, fixed essence, the ideal en-soi, purely for emotional comfort and escapism.
And the effects are profound because that self-deception can't be sustained forever.
No, and we see this thing called the Proteus effect in action. The avatar's appearance actually shapes the user's real-world behavior. Studies have shown users in taller avatars often act more aggressively or dominantly in the virtual space.
But what happens when the session ends, when you take the headset off?
Well, alarmingly, longitudinal studies found a 30% increase in VR self-esteem for users with these idealized avatars, but it came at a cost. They found a 22% increase in depression and anxiety after use.
Wow.
They attributed it to identity fragmentation. Users feel their everyday selves are just withering in comparison to their idealized digital twin.
That uneasy feeling when you take off the headset and step back into your real, contingent, factical body, that visceral disappointment, that sounds exactly like Sartre's description of nausea.
It aligns perfectly. Empirical studies found that 40% of users experience some kind of post-session dissonance after VR use. That existential unease or nausea when you awaken to the weight of your own facticity after the illusion of the perfect en-soi breaks.
And the irony is, this dynamic even seeps into features that are designed for inclusion and accessibility.
Yes, the uncomfortable ethical irony. Features like inclusive avatars, while they provide choice, also allow users to effectively hide disabilities. While that might be empowering for comfort, it runs the risk of perpetuating a kind of virtual ableism.
You're encouraged to avoid the struggle of reality instead of questioning and challenging real-world barriers.
It becomes an alienated existence where freedom is squandered on a comforting illusion instead of being directed toward a meaningful transformation of the real world.
So if using an idealized avatar is self-deception, then the next step, deliberately deceiving others, is an interpersonal enactment of bad faith: catfishing.
Catfishing just flourishes in the anonymity of these digital spaces. It's deceptively presenting a false identity, but philosophically, it's the perpetrator trying to relegate the other to being a fixed object, an En-soi, that simply exists to serve the deceiver's desires.
While also denying their own choice, to be honest.
Right. Tell us more about the case study of Jordan, the deceiver.
So Jordan was a middle-aged divorcee who used a false 25-year-old artist avatar in the metaverse. Jordan formed a virtual relationship with another user, only for the deception to be discovered when the sound of Jordan's voice just didn't align with the idealized avatar.
And the victim reported experiencing betrayal trauma, a deep sense of disorientation when the other they engaged with as a subject suddenly reveals themselves to be an objectified construct.
And the rationale the deceiver uses to justify it is itself an act of bad faith.
Absolutely. The perpetrator, Jordan, exhibited bad faith by rationalizing the action with the common excuse, it's just a game, or it's only the metaverse. This is a denial of the choice for honesty and a refusal to recognize the ethical implications of treating another person as a means to an end.
And this isn't just some fringe behavior either. The data shows this kind of deception is worryingly pervasive.
It is. A 2024 study of metaverse users revealed that 28% engaged in mild deception, inflating their social status or appearance, and 12% were involved in full catfishing.
Wow.
The psychological consequences for victims are severe. Documented increases in anxiety and poor mental health that persist long after the incident.
And the deceiver doesn't get away clean either.
No. Even the perpetrator experiences an empirical nausea, a feeling of guilt and fracture of self, immediately after the deception wears off. It reflects Sartre's description of bad faith as a perpetual disappearance of the deceiver. You can't maintain the lie without fragmenting your own consciousness.
We've spent a lot of time discussing this internal and collective flight from freedom, but we need to address the structural constraints that really complicate Sartre's position. Because radical freedom sounds great until you realize not everyone starts on the same playing field.
This is the crucial intersection where Simone de Beauvoir critiques Sartre, her lifelong partner and philosophical peer. While Sartre emphasizes ontological freedom, that absolute inherent freedom we're born with as consciousness, Beauvoir argues that this is too abstract.
Right.
It fails to account for how oppression and social structures make people unequally free in their capacity to actually exercise that freedom.
So Sartre says even if you are literally chained, your consciousness is still free to reinterpret your situation and choose your attitude towards it.
Exactly. A slave's consciousness is internally free to reinterpret their situation, regardless of their chains. Beauvoir saw that focus on pure internal freedom as potentially leading to an attitude of inaction towards alleviating the ills of mankind.
That's a powerful challenge. I mean, isn't Sartre's idea that a slave is internally free a bit of a privileged viewpoint that basically excuses the need for social revolution?
That was Beauvoir's core ethical correction. She stressed that we're embodied creatures, we're deeply shaped by and embedded in society. Our freedom is contextual or situated. We can't analyze the pour-soi as if it exists in a vacuum. Sartre gave us a description of our natural freedom, but he didn't really provide a prescriptive ethical theory for why we ought to choose freedom, especially when we're confronting injustice.
So she grounds freedom in material and social reality by introducing two necessary concepts to achieve a worthwhile life: moral freedom and power.
Power is the material foundation. It's the freedom from material and social constraints. Oppression strips away power, making it difficult or impossible to achieve moral freedom. If you're starving, your freedom is overwhelmingly directed towards the choice of finding food, not becoming an artist.
And moral freedom.
Moral freedom is the reflective, chosen freedom, not the one you're given at birth. It's attained through the conscious affirmation of your ontological freedom and the choice to engage in projects that enable freedom for yourself and, critically, the liberation of others.
That's the key part.
It's the active commitment to transcending your facticity despite constraints. Beauvoir put it beautifully. To will oneself moral and to will oneself free are one and the same decision.
So We can be ontologically free, the conscious fire, but still lack the material power and the moral choice to act on that freedom, especially if we're oppressed. The goal isn't just to be free, but to will freedom for ourselves and for others.
And people often fail to attain this moral freedom by running from the responsibility of choice. Beauvoir detailed several ethical characters who try to deny life's ambiguity. Two of them are critical for understanding how systems operate today, the subman and the serious man.
Okay, let's start with the subman.
The subman is defined by apathy and fear. He views his own existence as insignificant, and he avoids making any choices that disrupt his accepted facticity. He refuses to take initiative. He sinks into inertia.
And he's dangerously malleable to the choices of others, often recruited to do the actual dirty work in oppressive movements. The person who silently carries out orders because they've paralyzed their own will.
A famous historical example often cited here is Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi bureaucrat responsible for organizing the logistics of the Holocaust. During his trial, he claimed he was just following moral law, living life under a spell. He denied his freedom and interdependence. He's the exemplary subman, paralyzed by fear, seeking refuge in the perceived safety of obedience.
But the serious man, while maybe one step above, is arguably more dangerous, and he feels closer to the character of Julian, the HR manager. How is Julian's serious man behavior functionally different from Eichmann's subman behavior?
That's a key distinction. The subman is paralyzed by fear and apathy. The serious man is dogmatic and active. He clings to social roles, policies, and values as unconditioned absolutes. He hides behind fixed identities, not out of fear of action, but out of fear of the meaninglessness of choice. He believes the value exists in the policy, not in his judgment.
So Julian, by insisting the system requires this, is acting as a serious man because he's prioritizing the fixed essence of the corporate policy above the living, breathing, contingent reality of the applicant's merit.
Precisely. He actively chooses society's values and seeks to impose them dogmatically. The serious man is dangerous because he'll cast the needs of others aside if they conflict with his prescribed values. He's the fanatical character, the true bureaucrat, the ideologue.
So the subman is the grunt who follows orders because he's terrified of freedom. The serious man is the architect of the system who truly believes the system is a fixed, divine entity and is running from his own choice to create those rules.
And this tension between radical individual freedom and structural constraint is playing out in devastating, ironic ways within the very institutions meant to educate us today. This brings Beauvoir's critique into sharp, modern focus.
Let's look at Elias, the university student. He enters the institution ready to define his essence through free action, subscribing to the Sartrean ideal. He is prepared to take responsibility for his choices.
But the institution that promised to cultivate his agency has changed its approach. Instead of treating him as a free subject, capable of transcending his background, the administration constantly reminds him of his demographic category and enforces a deterministic view of his life based on systemic oppression.
So when he tries to engage in open debate or push for merit-based achievement, he's shut down by administrative codes designed to protect him, but which inadvertently strip him of his resilience and agency.
Elias feels a profound sense of noble betrayal. The structural critique, originally intended to illuminate oppression and facilitate liberation, Beauvoir's project, has been weaponized to create a new form of determinism. The structures meant to support his freedom are actually enforcing a narrative that his path is predetermined.
He's caught in an impossible tension. Sartre tells him he's radically free, but the institution tells him he is a product of his fixed environment.
And the consequence is tragic paralysis. Elias stops trying to excel and sinks into a passive cynicism, accepting the narrative that the deck is too stacked to bother making meaningful choices. He's paralyzed not by the weight of choice Sartre's anxiety, but by the suffocation of low expectations disguised as care.
This is the ultimate paradoxical bad faith, accepting a deterministic identity imposed on you by a system that was supposed to liberate you. This deep dive has shown us just how persistent and sophisticated the denial of freedom is. Bad faith isn't just some old philosophical concept. It perfectly diagnoses modern life in a way that connects the coffee shop, the HR office, and the metaverse.
Absolutely. The pervasive denial of the fundamental truth of human existence, that we're defined by our radical freedom and responsibility, it manifests everywhere. Denying job choices, hiding behind digital personas, embracing dogmatic seriousness, accepting deterministic narratives. We're always trying to find a way to collapse the conscious fire back into the inert, safe rock.
And the most profound threat, the real danger in the modern world, isn't external censorship or a lack of opportunity.
No. The most profound threat is the voluntary, continuous choice to outsource our freedom to an algorithm, a policy, or a fixed social role. It's the terrifying self-inflicted choice to become an En-soi fixed thing when we are fundamentally a Pour-soi free consciousness.
True authenticity, then, it's not about finding some pre-existing true self hidden deep inside.
It's about acknowledging the constant, ongoing process of self-creation, embracing the necessary anguish that comes with it, and committing to the difficult, continuous project of willing freedom for yourself and, crucially, for the liberation of others. It requires a daily rejection of the comfort of being a thing and a commitment to bearing the burden of the fire.